In the shadowy depths of the criminal underworld, there emerged a figure both feared and respected. A man who struck fear into the hearts of his enemies and commanded respect among his peers. His name was Tony Provenzano. A top labor racketeer, Teamsters Union official, and loyal member of the Genovese Crime Family, Tony Pro was a force to be reckoned with. His close association with International Brotherhood of Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa further elevated his reputation, influence, and power. But after Hoffa's disappearance in 1975, the house that Tony Pro spent decades building eventually came crashing down. Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano was born in 1917 in New York City's Lower East Side, one of 6 sons born to a Sicilian family. Early on, he migrated to New Jersey, which is where he operated from his entire life. Since the early 1950s, Provenzano had been identified as a top labor racketeer and New Jersey hoodlum. It is mob lore that Anthony Tony Bender Strollo gave Provenzano his big break in the mob after taking a liking to the young hood and placing him into Teamsters Local 560. 2 of Tony Pro's brothers, Salvatore Sammy Pro and Nunzio Pro, were also Teamsters officials and lifelong partners of Tony's and the mob. Sammy was said to have been an inducted soldier and Nunzio an associate. His activities included labor union racketeering, extortion, embezzlement, shylocking, strong-arm enforcer and murder, gambling, truck hijacking, and counterfeiting. Provenzano had a notorious reputation for savagery and viciousness and was well known to authorities. And although various sources list him as a captain at times, Button Guys doesn't believe he was ever more than a formally inducted soldier. Nonetheless, Tony was a top figure in the mob, a highly feared and respected top earner and loyal mob member. Anthony Strollo was initially said to have been his rabbi. In future years, he was close with Jerry Katina, and by the mid-1970s, he was said to be under Capo Matthew Matty the Horse Ianello. Tony Pro joined the Teamsters as a Depression-era truck driver, and through muscle and shrewd maneuvers, fought his way into the top ranks of the crime-riddled union. His way was strewn with violent election campaigns, federal and state investigations, the disappearances and mysterious deaths of union opponents, free homes and Cadillacs, large salaries, the animosity of racket busters, and the respect of union men. Over the years, Tony and his loyal minions infiltrated and corrupted to their very core several key union locals of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, specifically Teamsters Local 560, which was always the primary base of operations and the local that the Provenzano family treated as their own private family dynasty. Tony was officially employed there over the years in various union posts such as organizer, business agent, vice president, and secretary-treasurer until he was expelled from the union and barred from holding any position because of a federal labor rackets conviction. However, in his absence, Tony Provenzano ensured that Local 560 employed several members of his own blood family either as labor officials or as an office manager. Behind Tony Pro's rise and fall was said to lay a shadowy world of associates whose talents lay in beating other men with hammers, in selling labor peace to the trucking industry, in garrotes and guns, and the clever use of garbage grinders and incinerators to make enemies disappear. During his rise to prominence on both the local and later national labor movement scene, Tony Pro ran into resistance several times throughout the years. He usually had his henchmen mercilessly beat his opponents into submission, or as happened in one case, made an opposition leader permanently disappear, until he had ironclad control of all Teamster operations in the northern New Jersey area. The massive 13,000-member Local 560 based in Union City was the premier trucking local in New Jersey, and for that matter, the largest truckers local in the New York area as well. It was a powerhouse, and whoever controlled it was a powerhouse. Eventually, Tony Pro became head of the Teamsters Joint Council of New Jersey, giving him pivotal control of all Teamsters operations in the Northeast sector. He became an intimate of International Brotherhood of Teamsters president Jimmy Hoffa in Detroit, the home base of the International. And Provenzano could and did ensure that the votes always swung Hoffa's way in order to keep secure his coveted post as president. This also gave the mob control over that coveted position, as well as the puppeteers who pulled Hoffa's strings behind the scenes. Several mafia families worked in unison toward this effort. The Detroit Borgata had the official claim to Hoffa. After all, this was their boy. But his position was far from a shoo-in without key votes from heavily populated districts like the New York-New Jersey region and other states. Hence, Hoffa's request and plea for help from his friends' friends. Men with names like Johnny Dio, Tony Ducks, and Tony Pro are the ones who kept Hoffa in power. He provided them with multiple charters during the late 1940s to the early 1950s era to form paper locals. What this meant was that it gave the mafiosi authority to create and run their own unions as they wished. In actuality, paper locals had no members. They had a phantom rank and file, but it allowed the union hierarchy to cast their vote Hoffa's way when the national union elections came up. So it made it seem as though the bulk of the rank-and-file membership, several million votes, wanted Hoffa, and it always ensured that Hoffa and the mob stayed at the helm of union power. As a side note, we must add that in truth, the vast majority of the union's real rank-and-file did indeed love Hoffa. He was a great president and leader and did more positive things for the men than anyone ever expected any leader would be able to achieve. But federal authorities hated him, most notably Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General. Soon, the five families and their amici across the country had ironclad control of union locals that organized many major industries, including trucking, warehousing, manufacturing, garbage carting, garment, machinery, and jewelry, to name but a few. Local 560 was a major piece of this nationwide mafia mosaic, and Tony and his brother Sally Pro were entrusted by the Genovese hierarchy to watch the candy store, so to speak, for their brigata. Tony Provenzano would spend years in various courts and prisons, starting with the 1963 conviction for extortion that sent him to prison for 7 years. He had a small but dedicated crew of henchmen over the years that included his two brothers, Salvatore and Nunzio, Salvatore Sally Bugs Briguglio, Stephen and Thomas Andretta, Armand Cookie Fogno, Ralph Little Ralphie Picardo, Philip Brother Moscato, and Harold K.O. Konigsberg. In 1975, after the disappearance and presumed gangland murder of Jimmy Hoffa, Tony Provenzano almost immediately became the prime suspect in Hoffa's disappearance, along with Detroit capo Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. One of the most intensive FBI investigations in U.S. history failed to unearth Hoffa or ever uncover the mystery surrounding the circumstances of his suspected killing. That said, federal authorities did their very best to torture Tony Pro and go after him and his close associates in every possible way to try and either turn a cooperating witness or to punish those suspected of Hoffa's death in any way possible. They overturned every rock in their quest for a conviction. In the coming weeks and months, Provenzano was indicted repeatedly. In 1975, he and mob figures Lawrence Fat Larry Palladino and Anthony Tony Bentro Bentrovato were indicted for their attempt to influence and bribe a trustee of the Teamsters Pension Fund to approve a $2.3 million loan for the Woodstock Hotel in New York City. They, of course, would have received a huge kickback had it gone through, but Tony Pro was convicted of these charges after trial and sentenced to 4 years in prison. In 1977, Tony was charged in the 1961 kidnapping and murder of Anthony Three Fingers Tony Castellito, another hoodlum figure vying for a leadership position in Local 560. At the time, he was challenging Provenzano for the presidency of the local. Provenzano would eventually be convicted of this murder along with his buddy Harold Konigsberg and sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison to be served consecutively to his federal racketeering conspiracy conviction. The story goes, at least according to trial testimony, that back in 1961, Provenzano had paid Konigsberg, a freelance mob enforcer and convicted loan shark, $15,000 to kill Castellitto. Konigsberg's Salvatore Briguglio, who himself was murdered just a year before this particular case went to trial, and 3 other men had lured Castellitto to his own summer home in upstate New York, hit him with a lead pipe, and strangled him to death with a piano wire. His body was never found. As a side note, back in 1963, another rival of Tony Pro by the name of Walter Glockner was shot to death in Hoboken, New Jersey, just 2 days into Provenzano's trial for extorting payoffs for labor peace. Glockner had worked for the Dorn Transportation Company, the same company that Provenzano had been accused of extorting. In 1979, he was convicted a second time on extortion and federal racketeering counts and received an additional 10 years in federal prison. He started this jail term in 1980. In 1984, a federal judge essentially fired the entire executive board of Tony Pro's Local 560 after finding the corruption-ridden union guilty of intimidating its members through murders, threats, and economic reprisals. It was the first time the government used the RICO Act to remove corrupt union officials. In his ruling, U.S. District Judge Harold Ackerman wrote, "The group of gangsters, aided and abetted by their relatives and sycophants, engaged in a multifaceted orgy of criminal activity." Ackerman replaced the executive board with a court-appointed trustee. And that was the end of the house that Tony Provenzano built. Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano died of a heart attack on December 12, 1988 at a local hospital near Lompoc Federal Prison where he had been serving his sentence for his extortion conviction. He was 71 years old. We hope you found the story of Anthony Provenzano as intriguing as we did. Be sure to check out the Button Guys website at www.thenewyorkmafia.com, where you can read even more profiles on New Jersey gangsters and other gangsters throughout the country. Thank you for watching. Until next time.